was this fifth chapter. Uddhared atmanatmanam, natmanam avasadayet, atmaiva hyatmano bandhu, ratmaiva ripuratmanah. And what, when Bhagavan Shankaracharya very nicely explained this, who is this? I mean, in case you want to start doing karmas, these karmas are sadhana, are the karana for aruruksha, the person who is aspiring to ascend to a higher plane of self-realization, to become a jnana nishtha. However, a person who is already yoga rudha, what is this particular technique that he has to employ to make further progress in his spiritual journey? And then the karana that was mentioned in the third sloka, shamaha karana muchyate. He has to do upashama, sarvakarma sannyasa. He has to turn inwards and meditate on his own self. That is what was advised. This is being elaborated in the sloka number 5. Because you see, when you are doing any kind of karmas or upasanas, you have some sort of connectivity with the external world. You want to do pratikopasana, then you are sitting before a certain deity and you are meditating. Or if you're doing japa, so you need a mala and you're sitting there and you're doing it. You're doing some yajna, you are doing charity work, whatever external activities, even though you're doing it for purifying your consciousness. You are doing for sattva suddhi. You are not doing because you have any phala bhisandhi. You are doing it not to benefit any particular specific person in the family or outside. In general, you're doing driven by the call of duty and is prescribed by the spiritual texts. You are not violating any advised code of conduct that we're supposed to kind of abide by as moral citizens. He's a vidheyatma. By nature, he kind of is driven by the moral code of conduct. He's not going to harm anyone. This sort of a person, what will be the set of techniques he will employ once he becomes yogarudha? When he's yoga prapta, he's already got vairagya, he's going to start the next phase of a journey, then the whole game changes, right? As we keep talking about, if you have to take a long journey, first you have to board a flight, and to board a flight you have maybe a short bus or train or metro ride, or maybe you're going by a taxi. But as soon as you board the flight, you're no more on the ground. Your connection is no more with any physical surface on which you're moving. You're moving in the air. Same here. When you become a yogarudha, you go to the next higher level. How do you deal with that situation? This is mentioned here. What is saying? Uddharet atmanatmanam. You have to pull yourself. The person, the sadhaka, pulls himself. Atmana atmanam. Now, there are two ways in which you can make sense of two atmas mentioned here. Atmana is basically a third case, first person, atmana, by the self. And then atmanam, to the atma. So you're saying one is the second case, the other one is the third case. So with the help of atma, you shall pull the atma up. What is the meaning of these two descriptions? Because the same word, different cases, which means the same word has two different meanings. And the critics, the scholars, the great seers who have commented on the Bhagavad Gita, there are two different ways in which they're looking at it. There are some people who are saying is that Atma is Bandhu of Atma. So as we had discussed yesterday, and we'll go into the Sankara Bhasha in detail today, that essentially it's the mind. The first one is your mind. And the second one is the Karya Karana Sanghata Rupa, the body-mind complex that all of us are. The body, the mind, everything, which defines our personhood as to who we are, because all of us are Satchidananda Swarupa in an ultimate sense. That is taken for granted. However, given the context in which we find ourselves at a phenomenal level, which is a Vyavaharika Sthara, at that level, we have personalities, we have names, we have forms, we have social identities, economic identities, national identities. So here we are talking about the Vyakti, which is Upahita. It has a crown or it has a particular mask. It has an identity imposed on it. Vedanta will say this identity is imposed because of ignorance. That is taken for granted here. So when you are doing a sadhaka, you are not a sarvajna, you are not a atmakya, you are agya. We are making progress from one level to another level. At this intermediate level, what happens with us is that in the first stage, we are doing some bahiranga sadhana. Once that is over, we are starting antaranga sadhana, which is an internal universe in which the technology of the self is not about using a hammer or a sword or a pen or a pencil or anything or a computer. It's all about dealing with yourself with the help of yourself. So, this Atmana, some scholars have interpreted that a jiva. The person is his best friend. Others have kind of interpreted it is that your mind is your best friend and worst enemy. Okay. Now let's look at Sankara Bhashya and then we'll go to a couple of other commentaries. So Uddharet Atmana, this yeah, fourth sloka. Yeah. Yada evam yoga rudha tada tena atmana atmano uddharet. Atmano uddharet. So what he's trying to say is once you have become yoga rudha, at what point your karma comes to an end is also defined in this sloka. You do not need any external help once you have graduated to become a yoga rudha. Tena, okay, atmana, atma atmano uddhare, uddhruto bhavati. So yourself gets lifted by your mind. Sansara darsana, okay, sansara anartha brata. So this word is kind of false and it's anarthaka. It is without any substantial meaning or objective which you can fulfill by looking at this sansara. The whole thing is kind of seen as delusional, transitory, passing in nature, and all the time a source of distraction. So if you jump into it, you're not reaching any destination. Therefore, he says that sansarat anartha vratat. So this is it's anarthamulaka, not arthamulaka. There is no significant real goal to be achieved here. Ataha udharet sansara sagare. And therefore, in this ocean called sansara, in this whole ocean, how do you, pull yourself, rescue yourself? Nimagnam atmanam, this atma, that is your jivatma, that is your personhood, dikarya karana sanghata. You have a causal body and you have a physical body which is appearing. There's a subtle body. This whole complex, the body mind complex that you are, that all of us are, tataha uddhartu haret, uddharet. Okay, udhvam haret iti uddharet. Then this particular atma or jivatma, how do you lift it? What is the meaning of uddharet? Udhvam haret. You lift it upwards. Okay, yoga rudha. Yoga rudhatam apadayet ityartha. That means that you sort of maintain that yoga rudhata. That means you maintain that state of being in a state of self meditation. And this process of meditation happens because you have already perfected your mind by disconnecting it from external stimulants and temptations. Even though the indriyas or the senses shall connect by their very nature with the objects of the senses. However, because you are intelligent, like a master having a few pet dogs, and the master walks and the dogs follow him. There are masters who have a leash to kind of control their dogs, and there are masters who sort of guide their dogs as the pets, even without putting them on a leash. So it depends on how expert you are and how loyal are your pets to you. So he sort of carries his senses with him, but he's not driven as all over the place. He's not scattered because of the pull of the senses to different objects of pleasure, okay, or distraction. Na atmanam avasadayet. Don't immerse that jivatma, that self that you are, in this sansara sagara, in this ocean of darkness, in the ocean of pain and pleasure, sensory perceptions, sensory pleasures, frustrations, anger, all rage, all sorts of things that you can to describe the whole gamut of human experiences, in which once you jump into it, there's no coming out. That's why it's alerting. Okay? No adhogamaya, and don't go down. That's what he's saying. Atmeva hi yasmat atmano bandhu. And therefore, he's clarifying, because in this whole game of self realization, in this whole business of looking for the self, you have only one friend. And who is that? So some people say you are your best friend. And most of these management gurus, they will say, so I'm in this crisis, what can I do? And the coach in his own style sort of comes and sort of in a certain way compassionately listens to your long story, and he says, yeah, there's somebody who can help you, and you feel very excited. What should I do? He smiles and says, yeah, I know there's one person who can actually help you. I know you are in stress and you deserve help, and there's someone actually very capable of helping you. Then your eyes kind of glow in expectation that he's going to give you the reference of a friend or a big guy who is going to give you a new job or give you a promotion or something. He says, yeah, do you know who is that person? It's you. You are the only person who can help yourself in this kind of a condition. You might feel depressed, but that's the basic truth that he wants to convey to you. Now he anyah kaschid, and there is no one else. Kaschid bandhur yah sansara muktaye bhavati. In order for liberating you from this sansara, this whole process, this chain of birth and death, happiness and pain, excitement and depression, we are kind of caught up in this whole chain, and it's very repetitive. It happens, we forget, we think things have changed, it comes back in a new form, and this cycle sort of repeats itself. And he's saying no one else can help you. The one thing that can help you is your mind. Bandhurapi tavan moksham prati pratikula eva snehadi bandhana ayatanatvad tasmad yuktam avadharanam atmeva hi atmano bandhu iti. He's saying even if you have some external friends, let's imagine, I mean, you may have a very loyal husband and wife, you may have a very supportive brother or sister, or maybe very kind and compassionate, empathetic parents, or teachers, or friends. You may have all them. But he says, they, given the very context of your journey, are going to be a drag on your progress. They're supposed to help you in cooking a dish. When you're not well, they'll give you medicine, they'll help you fix a particular thing in the house. They're wonderful for these purposes. When it comes to the journey of the self, they might actually prove to be a drag on your progress. Why? Because they have a net of love and affection and attachment, that web they're going to cast around you, and you're stuck there. You cannot go forward. Okay? And then that's why you should not at all. And Madhusudana Saraswati has given a beautiful explanation about what it happens. What it says is like a kosakara. In these silkworms, it sort of comes out of some larva, and they sort of have this web, and they sort of knit it themselves, and they caught up and they hide inside, and they become a prisoner there, the silkworms. And all of us, we sort of spin a web around ourselves, our ego, our aspirations. I don't like this. This is my hobby. These are my friends. These are the brands I appreciate. I don't touch these brands. So there is a whole make-believe world which we create with the help of our mind. Why? The Atma is only enemy. That Atma is the mind. Wherever the mind is not aware of the responsibility that it can actually discharge, when you are clear about the goal of life, the mind will behave as an ignorant fool, very powerful, and take you all over the place. Same mind, when it's trained, it understands, it's been given to understand at least, that it should not feel uncomfortable with the hard journey, the difficult, arduous journey that you have decided to undertake. At that moment, what happens is the mind takes time to sort of respond to you. It doesn't respond very easily. That's why the whole yogic science is all about training the mind. Once the mind is trained, a lot of things happen almost without much effort. They happen spontaneously. So what he's saying is that these external friends might be friends and very useful for purposes other than elevating yourself in a spiritual journey. Atmeva ripuhu, and your mind or you yourself are the worst enemy. Why? Satruhu yo anyo apakari vahya satruhu. So somebody, instead of who is helping you, who is harming you, or who is kind of putting up certain hurdles in your journey and obstructing your progress, he's your enemy. And the mind sometimes behaves like that. That's why this word ripu is kind of used to describe the mind. Satruhu. So api atma prayukta eva iti yuktam eva avadharanam atma eva ripu atmanah iti. Then he's saying, even the external enemies that we encounter in our lives, of course, there's something called misfortune, there's something called bad luck, and all of us pass through it. Very innocent, nice people get hurt by strangers for no rhyme or reason. You are basically a good fellow in a wrong place, or that fellow, I mean, your presence is targeted. Maybe he's not targeting you because your presence becomes a victim of that person's violence or acts of violence, and you suffer. It can happen. There's nothing personal about this sort of violence which are inflicted by certain evil-minded people or ignorant minds. That is all there. But he's saying even Bahya Satrus and all enemies that we encounter in our lives are essentially they happen in our lives because the way our mind has taken us to certain places. It could be a bad habit. It could be a wrong situation in the office. It could be a wrong situation at home. And if you do a bit of self-analysis, end of the day, you will turn back and find that somewhere the game was started by you by responding to a certain thing in an inefficient way. I would not say morally wrong way. Sometimes we are inefficient, we are ineffective, and we have wrong emotional responses, and there is a cascading effect, and then suddenly we find ourselves cornered and we get hurt. So therefore, he's saying that it's right to say that Atma is in fact the enemy. And if we look at Madhusudana Saraswati, he's making an interesting sort of commentary on this, and we will look at it. What he's saying is, I will not go into deeper details. Yo yada evam yogarudha tada tena atmana eva atma udhrito bhavati. Same sentence taken from Bhagavad Pada, Shankaracharya. Sansara anartha bratat. From this whole sansara, which is meaningless and full of falsehoods and stuff like that. Uddharit iti. Then he's saying, Atmana viveka yuktena. So the mind which is empowered with a sense of discrimination, who can differentiate the good from the bad, which can take right decisions. So in a way, what is glorified in this sentence, if we put it in the new management jargon or in our conversation these days, that it's not that we think is such an important thing. What is important is how good we are at deliberation. We are all deliberative human beings. We can analyze and we can understand, we can explore, we can imagine. The mind can do a hell lot of things. What it needs to do to actually impact our movement forward is that it needs to take right decisions at right time in a manner which enhances the possibilities of our progress being sustainable and our inching closer to our destination. And therefore, it's all about how well we are with our deliberations. Are we, this particular, this whole faculty, the ability to take a right decision, to be able to judge things properly and see the risks and avoid things which are not just uncomfortable but harmful. And it requires a lot of mental alertness. What Bhagavan says again and again, I understand that if you rely only on your mind, there's going to be a lot of problem. And that will come in the next sloka. When you stay connected with me, make me your compass. Stay alert to my presence in your life. Be matparaha. And I'm going to take care of you. So you remember me. But if you're a secular Vedantist, no problem. You're a Buddhist, no problem. All that's being hinted here is constantly being aware of the consciousness that you are. Be aware of that truth and put it in the center of your mental universe, in the center of your consciousness. Then the whole thing happens differently. In the presence of that torchlight, which provides a certain direction, you can move much more easily while taking decisions. We're not aware of it when we are unaware of ourselves, when we are not committed to the Lord. If we are theistic, I will use that religious language. If you are not a problem. But the difference is whether we are self-aware or we are not. When we are self-aware, our mind is our best friend. We are our best friend. When we are not self-aware, then what is active? What is active is a bundle of past sanskaras, inherited emotions, and whole baggage we have been carrying, not during this life, but billions of lives that we have passed through. And that whole virus or package or program or whatever, we have to deprogram ourselves. And here he's saying deprogramming is very simple. Being aware of the self is the key to deprogramming ourselves. Once we start this meditation, initially nothing much happens initially. It's a slow process, but then things will start happening. That's what's being hinted here. So what Madhusudana Saraswati is saying, Atmana viveka yuktena manasa atmanam swam jivam sansara samudre nimagnam tat uddhare ut urdhvam hare. So with the help of a mind which is discriminating, we are supposed to lift that particular self that we are with name and form, with a social identity, as a father, or a husband, as a student, as a professional, and then you have layers of existences, isn't it? There's a professional life, and as they call it, modular selves. There are different modules in which we appear. Sometimes we have emotions of a friend, sometimes emotions of a father, sometimes emotions of husband or a wife or sister, whatever. But end of the day, if we are trying to sort of integrate all these modules and make our movement forward as spiritual aspirant, we need to understand that once we shed the light of discrimination or viveka on this whole thing called our mind or manas, things become easier because we have a very powerful friend with us. And when we are not doing that, then things kind of get messed up. That is what is hinted in brief. Visya Sangha Parityagena, Visaya Sangha Parityagena, when that asakti or whatever, that attachment that you have with objects of sense pleasures or whatever, yoga rudhatam apadayet ityarthaha. So constantly being aware, the eyes will go, as I keep mentioning that, okay, you're going through a mall, there's several shops, you actually are supposed to pick up a book for your son or daughter. But in the way you suddenly, a lot of people sort of invite you if it's one of these flea markets or in a mall where these days people sort of accost you, they call you, why don't you come and have a look at this, right? So if you are clear, your eyes go over there, your ears will listen to a lot of things, you will smell a lot of things, but then you have an objective. I'm here, I have 10 minutes, I have to pick up a book, it's very important. She or he has an examination, you'll complete the task, you'll get out of the place. Okay, and get going, drive away from this whole place. That's how the mind in the samsara, we hear so many things, we experience, we see, but when we are self-aware, we know where to return from, what's the Lakshman Rekha around us. That doesn't make us boring human beings. Some people say that this sort of a spiritual life is actually putting yourself in a shell. They will talk like that you are imprisoning yourself. But actually, if you look within, that gives great amount of freedom, because that starts with self-awareness, and there you are in control of your life, and you will not pass through which many of your so-called friends who celebrate freedom pass through. They most of the time don't tell it to anyone, but they find themselves again and again in situations in which they are not much in control. And a person who appears externally a very boring person because he sort of constantly is being aware of himself, you may be boring to others, but you will enjoy greatest self-control and awareness, and there you are in control of your life. That's what is hinted here. And we'll go to the next sloka. There's nothing much there, and the same thing is being repeated as to why, even if you have a friend in the external reality in your life, a real friend in office or at home or anything, that can actually be a roadblock because of the emotional baggage that comes with having such a deeper relationship. Doesn't mean you're going to abandon your family at this moment. We are talking about a yoga ruta. We are not talking about a aruruksha. So right now, those who are in a family situation, they need not bother. The sadhana prescribed for them is in fact what? Niskama karma. Palavhisandhi Ishvara arapana buddhya karma sampadana. So you are surrendering all your work, the fruits thereof, at the feet of the Lord. Have a few minutes of prayer at night. Have a few minutes of meditation or breathing in the morning, and do your work, and then you peacefully live your life happily. Doesn't mean you're not going to, if there's a birthday party, children are dancing, you're not going to dance. Do everything. But you're already doing, because your mind is kind of luminous with that self-consciousness. You have already started the journey. That itself is a great thing. If you keep reinforcing that experience, a lot of useless, a lot of clutter sort of leaves you. They just leave you. They go on their own. They live your life, and you're free. You're focusing on a few things, and they start happening in a smoother manner. This is about the fifth sloka. And the sixth sloka is now telling the phala. What is the, and what are the, there are two counter examples. What happens to the people who have an understanding of this fact of life? And what happens to people who are not aware of this truth in life? That Atma is the best friend of the Atma. That means your mind is the best friend, or you are your best friend, and you are your worst enemy. And that is being elaborated in Sloka 6. Bandhur Atma Atmanastasya Yenatmevatmanaditah Anatma Anatmanastu Satrutve Vartetatmeva Satruvat Bandhu Atmatmanastasya. So, who is there are two categories of people here. One is self-aware, the other one is not so self-aware. And these two categories of people are taken in the sloka, and then we will decipher the meaning thereof. What he's saying is Atma Atmanaha. So who is this Atmanaha? Because again, Atma and Atmanaha, two words. One is 6 case of the Atma. Atma is the friend of the Atma. Of the Atma means of whom? Jitatma. The person who has won over his mind. For him, his mind is his friend. So in case of a Jitatmana, a person who has won over his mind, body complex that we are, he's kind of control them. He holds his whole mental processes and physical processes. I'm not ruling out a few diseases or involuntary movements of the body. These things will happen. The biological clock has his own course to take. We cannot control it beyond a certain point. However, what is hinted here is that in case of a Jitatma, his Atma, his mind, is his best friend. Yena Atmeva Atmana Jitaha. And then, who is that fellow? The one, he's saying, who is that Atmana? Who is that Jitatma? Yena, the person by whom Atma Atmeva Atmana Jitaha. The one who has made use of his mind, his antakarana, his mental faculty, to win over his karyakarana sanghata rupa atma. That means his body or the body-mind complex or whatever. The one who has successfully engineered this technology of using his mind through the help of viveka, the power of discrimination, to kind of train his body and his mind, and he is in nice control of himself. That kind of a person is the one who can rely on the mind. Now, there is an alert here for many of us who are kind of a little well read, we're exposed to a few books. And if you talk to teenagers, they are the ones who will give you the worst shocks of your life, because they pick up a lot of things on the internet and they talk in a very philosophical language when you tell them something. What do they say? Bhagavad Gita says mind is the best friend. So I'm going to listen to myself. I'm not going to listen to you. I must listen to my heart. That's what all these gurus are telling. They'll watch a lot of YouTube channels. And then they tell you, do you know who is your best friend? Your mind is your best friend. Listen to your heart, not your dad, not your mom. And they put their parents in a very embarrassing situation sometimes and put them into great mental distress because the parents absolutely have no key as to how to communicate with the children. And sometimes when we are young, we have a lot of ideological arrogance and we have a lot of moral arrogance because life is generally pure and you're a good person, you're a bright student, you're a front bencher. So you sort of pass judgments on everyone. What Bhagavan is saying is that look here, yes, the mind is the best friend, but only for a qualified few. And what is that qualification? The qualification is that you must have actually practiced for a long period of time the skill of controlling your mind body complex, this whole thing here, with the help of this manas, with your subjective faculty. It's a very confusing thing, isn't it? He's first saying that your mind is your best friend. This is what he says first. Then he suddenly twists it and says, yeah, only for them who have used their mind to control their body mind complex, to sort of train their mind to be their slave. For them is their best friend. So you can say that there's kind of one thing depends on the other, right? So how do you resolve it? It's like this, that if I say that a person can actually rely on his pet, which could be otherwise a very violent dog, that violent dog, which is very dangerous, can be the best friend of a soldier or a hunter or somebody who is going on a long forest trek, provided that particular pet dog, which is not a pet dog then when it was picked up, wild dog has been sufficiently trained to understand the needs and the context in which the master or the owner is kind of signaling for something to be done or for the dog to behave in a certain way. That sort of a wild dog, if you have trained, can be of enormous use and help to you when you are going on a long forest trek compared to maybe a typical pet dog, a lap dog, because they're useless. If you're going on a forest trek, they are not going to be of any help. They're going to be a liability because they may be prey for many other violent animals. They can't even defend themselves. So it's a constant headache for you. However, if that particular wild dog that you have with you or slightly violent variety, that dog can be a great companion provided it has been trained sufficiently with professional help to understand what you require and the context and the situation. Then it kind of identifies with you. And I mean, certain YouTube channels, if you watch, you'll see how I saw one YouTube channel, it's fascinating. A small cat is kind of saving a few months old child from sort of tipping, it's sort of falling into a staircase and hurting itself in a very bad way. What the cat does is it tries to prevent the child from going there by frightening it. That sort of a cat, it could actually hurt the child if it's not trained. If it's a wild cat, it can kill the child. Same cat saves the life. Same way, when we have sufficiently, in a rightful way, have trained our mind, our mental habits, and have tuned them to our spiritual aspirations and needs, that sort of a mind is the best friend of you. And you can listen to it and rely. That means don't trust what the mind says. When you are in a normal Arurukya stage, rely more on what the spiritual texts say, what your parents and acharyas say. That is the initial stage. But a stage will come where you have ascended to greater self awareness, that even the words of the master, the textual inputs from a spiritual book may be relevant, but may lose some relevance beyond a certain point because you have evolved and your consciousness has evolved and you listen to the voice from within. That stage comes when you become kind of autonomous. And he's saying, anatmanastu satrutve. However, in case of a Ajita Atma, the person who hasn't won over the mind, his body-mind complex, because his mind kind of is jumping around. Then what is his mind? His mind is a bundle of inherited emotions, impressions, experiences, traumas, everything. And therefore, it will have raga, dvesha, attachment, and aversion, several other things. And it will mechanically respond to external stimuli when it is exposed to them in the light of its past experiences of reward or punishment, without bringing into focus what we shall call self awareness. Because it's like jada, it's like a machine, it just responds, it's like a program. There is no operator. Who is the operator? The viveka. Is it there? No, not there. Then what happens to it? It just makes some noise. It can do anything that the program wants it to do, and that's how it will not be a good friend. So as an enemy, bharteta atmeva satruvat, so it will behave like an enemy, right? So it's like you have a wonderful car, but there is some problem with its brake, or there's some problem with its engine, and you haven't checked it, and you have started driving on a long journey. What happens? It can ditch you on the path. Somewhere it doesn't respond. You're kicking, it doesn't start, or maybe there's some problem with the brake and all. You can lose your life because there's going to be an accident. You wrongly assess its ability to stop, and something wrong happens when the machine doesn't respond. Same way, when the mind is not properly trained. So it's like a machine learning program. The sadhana is like a machine learning program, not for any machine outside of us, but the machine which is inside of us, and that's our mind, right? So the new artificial intelligence that we're talking about is the Vedantic secret, that we have to bring it to focus and we have to make a movement forward. Okay, so this is what Satruva, this is the meaning of the sixth sloka. Now let's look at how Shankaracharya kind of explains it. Atmaeva bandhu atmaeva ripuhu atmanaha ityuktam tatra kim lakshanam atmano bandhuhu kim lakshano atmano ripu iti uchyate. Somebody might ask you this question, an aspirant, a student might ask you this question, sir, can you explain to me how do you describe and make sense of the Atma, which is the best friend? How do you make sense of that Atma or the mind, which is your worst enemy? How do you differentiate them? What is the Lakshana? And that's why he's now mentioning iti uchyate. Okay, listen to me, Bhagavan explains. Bandhu Atma Atmanaha Tasya. Tasya Atmanaha. Only of a person, of that Atma, of that Jivatma. And who is he? Saha Atma. Bandhu Yena Atmana Atmeva Jitaha. Only for him who, with the help of his mind, has won over his whole system. That means he has disciplined his mind. For him, that disciplined mind is the best friend. Atma karya karana sanghatu yena jito vasikritaha. That means you have taken it, you have done it, that vasikarana, you have controlled it. You are the real sovereign. And a lot of people say that I'm the master of my own universe, I'm the master of my own interests. This is the fundamental principle on which the whole liberal economics is based, that free exchange is justified without state interference, on the ground that the state cannot take over the responsibility of deciding for the citizens of the individuals. And that is how the whole theory about why the market should be supreme is justified. And it's justified on the ground that how can the state decide what you want to buy, what particular investment the society should do? You cannot decide that. So the liberal economists always say that no, the individual is the master of his own choices, and the state is essentially a necessary evil. Right? It's just as a policeman. It's supposed to be a referee or a witness and regulate this whole process, that there is a fair exchange. However, not get into the business of substituting individual choices by an imposition of a certain economic policy from above, taking away their power of choice. And that is the reason why, for example, in the US, the Republicans are opposed to Obamacare, because they're saying, why should the state decide? I should decide which health policy I want to buy. Why should the state impose any particular policy regime on me? That's what they're saying. However, what he's saying here is very clear. So how do you explain what is the bandhur? He's saying it's very clear that yes, man is the master of his universe, a master of his choices, but that choice making ability has to be kept in question. And that's one of the reasons why, for example, in India, If you purchase land for a person who is a tribal person, an indigenous person, the state can just annul it, and you cannot actually purchase that land. There are a lot of legal procedures. And similarly, now a lot of our choices are kind of subjected to be qualified, vetted by certain other overseeing authorities. These are questionable debates on good or bad. I'm not getting into it. But the truth of the matter is that choice per se cannot be qualified as a right choice. And similarly, the choices of the mind are not per se good or bad for you. If the mind is trained enough to make a right choice, it's good. If it's not trained enough to make a right choice, the individual free choice would be actually the nemesis. It can actually, you know, create a mess in our life. And that's what happens most of the time. And a lot of children sort of take their own decisions in life, then go back to the parents and say, why didn't you stop us from doing this? What were you doing? They sort of turn back. But when they're young, they're very energetic, they take a lot of decisions on their own. I mean, that sort of goes on. So he's saying, what is this Lakshana? He's explaining the person who's a Jitendra Ityartha. He has that, he has won over his senses. He's not driven by his senses. Anatmanastu, ajitatmanastu, the person who hasn't won over his senses, his mind, body, and all the senses, satrute satru bhave bharteta atma eva. And in such case, his mind, his senses, behave like his enemy. Yatha namna satruh atmano apakari, tatha atma atmanaha apakare vartate ityarthaha. So what he's trying to say is the way a particular outside enemy behaves like somebody who can harm you and can obstruct your progress, this your own internal being, your mental faculty, and your habits and the predilections of your mind under the influence of your specific senses, whether it's the rasana indriya or darsana indriya or sotra indriya, depends on what faculty you are doing. It could be a love for a particular music or a liking for a particular kind of food or whatever. It can drive you towards that. That means can sort of stop you from making progress in the direction you would like to make. Okay, that's how he's saying. Ityartha yatha atmano apakare vartite ityartha jitatmana iti. And then there's all the people are kind of now there's one interesting word that I saw in Nilakantha. What he's saying is manusva jaya phalamaha. This particular sloka, he says that if you can actually win over your mind, what are the benefit? Why should I struggle to win over my mind? He says in this sloka, you know, why should you control your mind? Okay, I tell you what's the benefit. If you actually win over your mind, you're going to find a great partner in your life. You'll never feel lonely because you're going to have a great friend with you all the time. Do you not want to be somebody who has the advantage of another person helping him? And that another person is nothing other than your ability to make right choices, that wisdom self in you, and that's kind of hidden, that's not blossoming because of a lot of wrong predilections, wrong sanskaras, and because of the anatma satruvat, the mind which is behaving like this. Let's train it. It's like same patch of land, and you do a bit of clearance and stuff like that, you turn that into a garden. Earlier, same patch of land you own, you go and there are thorns and you will bleed. And maybe there are all kinds of weeds and all kinds of insects, and maybe a few other animals may have settled there, maybe a couple of snakes or something. But if you sanitize the whole place and clean it up and stuff like that, that'll be a place you'll love to be in. And that's true about almost everything that we have in life. A particular place, barren place, can become a agricultural field, and a place with a lot of weeds and stuff like that can turn into a garden. A house can become a hell, a home can become a hell, and a house can be like an abandoned place. Okay, depends on what differentiates. What differentiates the good from bad in life, in this aspect that we're discussing today, is yatna, prayasa, effort, and right direction and right effort. With right direction and right effort, and throwing in a bit of devotion and throwing in a bit of self-awareness, it's a beautiful fragrance that we experience in our life. When you take that out, what we have in sum is actually a very painful experience that we constantly want to run away from. That's what he explains. In the, he is now giving you for the benefit of appreciating this whole process, which might appear to be very challenging. Uh, what does he say? Madhusudana Saraswati. Let's also look at him. Idanim kim lakshana atma atmano bandhu king lakshana atmano. Same thing he's saying. Atma karyana sanghato tena jitaha swavasikrataha atmana eva vivak yuktena mani eva natu sastradina. This is one interesting thing sort of brings in that this war we have. I long back remember reading an essay by a great author called Broughton Russell. He wrote this book called Let the People Think. It's basically a few essays, a few of his lectures. In one of his essays, says that there are three ages or three phases in which human beings have been fighting wars. And the first phase in the human civilization, all of us fought against nature, fought with nature. We wanted to have a house, we wanted to have cooked food, we had to fight against cold and heat and wild animals. So we fought against nature. The second phase, when societies developed, we people fought against each other. Men forced against, all the wars were fought by men against men. Who suffered? Women and children. And they have been victims of men in a way. So there's a long journey. All the wars are fought by men in a way. Women are blamed for it in the Puranas. That's a different story. But if you look at the major wars, all the major wars, who has suffered? The mothers and sisters and daughters. Of course, also sons and brothers and fathers have suffered. But the wars are generally fought by men. War is a game played by, it's a male game. Now, in these wars, the third phase, he says, the war will be human being against himself. So, in order to understand and spiritually sort of progress, it's a beautiful thing. And I still remember it sort of kind of stayed with me, that sentence. That, but actually, so far India is concerned, this particular truth sort of appeared in the mind of Indians thousands years before it occurred to someone like Broughton Russell, that our journey, this whole Bhagavad Gita, these Pandavas and Kauravas is nothing but our good sense and our bad sense. And there is a whole chapter, there's a whole episode in the Upanishads which talks about Devasura Sangrama. And the Deva and Asura, beautifully defined. Your indriyas are sense organs with viveka, with sastra, bihita orientation becomes devata. And the same indriyas and the senses that we have, when they are kind of bereft of that enlightenment, bereft of that good direction, they behave like asura. And if you look at that, which is mentioned in the Upanishads, in this particular sloka, is simplified for the initial, entrance into Vedanta. So Devasura Sangrama is not discussed here, but in these two slokas, to my mind, I sort of see it's kind of echoing what we read about the Devasura Sangrama. The Asuras and some of the sociologists are kind of saying it's a racial war between the white Indians who came and settled here against the Aborigines who are dark skinned and stuff like that. Leave it aside, because the Upanishad makes it very clear. The Devatas and Asuras are both siblings and born out of Prajapati. First, they're all brothers. So this is not about one race against the other. That's all funny. And what is the Prajapati? It's all within ourselves. So it's about the fight of the good sense against the poor or the bad sense, the power of discrimination against the power of ignorance and evil. And this evil is not the Abrahamic religion evil. It's just lack of proper understanding. It's ignorance. The word we use is avidya. We don't use the word evil. We use the word avidya. Papa is different, but avidya we are using. We are not falling prey to this whole idea that we are kind of perennial sinners or anything. Okay, so here, just to wind it up on this sloka number 16, what Madhusudana says is that, where is he? Yeah. So he's saying that this lakshana, that this sastradina, this war you're fighting, you're not fighting with the help of any physical, weapons. The weapons you require to fight this war with the ignorant self or the mind is not knives and guns and stuff like that. No, you don't need them. What do you need? What you need is saying that manasaiva. You fight it with your own mind, and it's very Zen-like, isn't it? So, like somebody say, so how do I do it? And the Zen guy will smile and say, by doing it. So how do I win over the mind? With the help of the mind. And you're essentially using the mind to destroy the mind. That means using the good part of the mind, the ability to decide, the ability to analyze, the ability to concentrate, focus, overcome distractions, in order to destroy the mind, which is the monkey mind, which is jumping around, which is confusing, and which is kind of laying, wailing us and sort of taking us to different places in imagination and consciousness, and sort of getting us trapped in its own web. And we want freedom, and that's why we're doing Vedanta. Okay, so that is how he sort of mentions that in this. And then ityapi satrutya satru bhave bharteta. And then if you have aditatma, then this sort of behaves as an kind of an enemy. Okay, so we sort of have come to the end of the sloka 6. The 7, I'll just do ucharana and we'll do the elaboration tomorrow. We have hit that timeline. Jitatmanah prasantasya paramatma samahitah शीतोष्ण सुख दुखेषु तथा माना pamanayoho. And this is the sort of benefit. This is the benefit if you have sort of succeeded in becoming a jitatma. If you can train your mind to be your best friend, be the best of pet dogs that you can ever imagine, most powerful and yet very humble and obedient. If you can do that, what happens? Jitatmanah prasantasya, that kind of a prasanna chitta atma, paramatma samahitaha, and that will be that paramatma word. And what is samadhi, Shankaracharya will say, and the Vaishnavas will beautifully say that samyak ahitaha, very comprehensively sort of established in the heart, that Purushottama Tattva, that we'll go into tomorrow. Chitosna Sukha Dukkeshu, all the dualities, heat and cold, happiness and sadness, excitement and melancholy, friendship and some sort of an enmity or conflict or whatever. In these dualities of life, Tatha mana pamanayoho. Sometimes somebody praises you, sometimes he sort of calumniates and he makes certain distressful remarks about you. That sort of a fellow is not affected by all this. He's very quiet. He keeps smiling because he knows these are all delusional. He is not a fool. He's wiser. I mean, there's a beautiful story. I'll tell you about it. It's called Gimfeld was his character. It's a long story. We'll discuss that tomorrow. How he sort of is considered to be an idiot by everyone, but at the end of his life, when he passes through it, he sort of realizes that all people around him are mostly idiots, and they always thought he was idiot. But he was happy that he was an idiot, that he didn't suffer like all these people around him who were very wise and suffered a lot. So with that, we stop here, and